A word of warning. My true crime is intended for adults. We may discuss disturbing cases, so viewer discretion is advised. Thank you. Today I'm going to talk about Stephen Lawrence. And I remember this being in the news. It was 28 years ago. Looking into this case for this episode is absolutely horrendous on so many levels. It might be a long one, so please do grab a project, come join me, and let's talk about Stephen Lawrence. Stephen Lawrence was born in Greenwich District Hospital on the 13th of September in 1974 to Jamaican parents who had emigrated to the UK in the 1960s. His father, Neville, was then a carpenter. His mother, Doreen, at that time was a special needs teacher. Brought up in Plumstead in southeast London, he was the eldest of 3 children. So they had Stephen, Stuart and Georgina. During his teenage years, Stephen excelled in running, competing for local Cambridge Harriers Athletics Club, and appeared as an extra in the Denzel Washington's film For Queen and Country. At the time of his death, he was studying technology and physics at Blackheath Bluecoat School and English Language and Literature at Woolwich College, and he was hoping to become an architect. Stephen had spent the day of Thursday the 22nd of April in 1993 at Blackheath Bluecoat School. After school, he visited the shops in Lewisham and then travelled by bus to an uncle's house in Grove Park. He was joined there by Dwayne Brooks, and they played video games until leaving at around 10 p.m. After realising that the 286 bus which they were travelling would get them home late, they decided to change for either bus route 161 or 122 on Wellhall Road. Stephen and Dwayne arrived at the bus stop on Wellhall Road at 10:25 p.m. Stephen walked along Wellhall Road to the junction of Dixon Road to see if he could see a bus coming, and then went back towards the bus stop. Dwayne was still on Wellhall Road between Dixon Road and the roundabout with Rochester Way and West Thorn Avenue. Dwayne saw a group of 5 or 6 white youths crossing Rochester Way on the opposite side of the street near the area of the zebra crossing and moving towards them. At or just after 10:38 p.m, he called out to ask whether Stephen saw the bus coming. Dwayne claimed that he heard one of the youths, I apologise, I am quoting, this is not language I agree with, but he heard one of the youths from across the road say, What, nigger? as they all quickly crossed the road and, quote, engulfed Stephen. The attackers forced Stephen down to the ground, then stabbed him to a depth of about 5 inches on both sides of the front of his body and in the right collarbone and left shoulder. Both wounds severed arteries before penetrating a lung. Stephen lost all feeling in his right arm and his breathing was constricted, while he was losing blood from 4 major blood vessels. Dwayne began running and shouted for Stephen to run to escape with him, while the attackers disappeared down Dixon Road. Dwayne and Stephen ran in the direction of Shooter's Hill. Stephen collapsed after running 130 yards, which is 120 metres. He bled to death soon afterwards. The pathologist who recorded that Stephen, managing to run this distance with a partially collapsed lung, was, quote, a testimony to his physical fitness. Dwayne ran to call an ambulance while an off-duty police officer stopped his car and covered Stephen with a blanket. Stephen was taken to Brook General Hospital by 11:05 p.m, but he'd already passed. He was gone. All 3 witnesses at the bus stop at the time of this attack said in statements that the attack was sudden and short, although none were later able to identify the suspects. In the days following Stephen's murder, several residents came forward to provide names of suspects, and an anonymous note was left on a police car window screen and in a telephone box naming a local gang as the 5 main suspects. The suspects were Gary Dobson, brothers Neil and Jamie Acortt, Luke Knight, and David Norris. In February 1999, officers investigating the handling of the initial inquiry revealed that a woman who might have been a vital witness had telephoned detectives 3 times within the first few days of the killing and appealed for her to contact them again. The 5 suspects were previously involved in racist knife attacks around the Eltham area, and that's where Stephen was and lived. 4 weeks before Stephen's death, Dobson and Neil Acortt were involved in a racist attack on a black teenager, Kevin London, who they verbally abused and attempted to stab. Neil's brother Jamie was accused of stabbing teenagers Darren Whittam in May 1992 and Darren Giles in 1994, causing Darren Giles to have a heart attack. The stabbings of victims Gurdeep Bangal and Stacey Benfield, which both occurred in March 1993 in Eltham, were also linked to Neil and Jamie Acortt, David Norris and Gary Dobson. So the initial investigations for Stephen Lawrence. Within 3 days of the crime, prime suspects had been identified. No arrests were made, however, until over 2 weeks after the murder. Detective Superintendent Brian Whedon, the officer who had been leading the murder investigation from its 3rd day and who would ultimately lead the murder squad for 14 months, explained to an incredulous public inquiry in 1998 that part of the reason no arrests had taken place by the 4th day after the killing, which would be Monday the 26th of April, was that he had not known the law allowed arrest upon reasonable suspicion, a basic point of criminal law. On the 7th of May 1993, the Aycourt brothers and Dobson were arrested. Norris turned himself into police and was likewise arrested 3 days later. Knight was arrested on the 3rd of June. Neil Aycourt picked out at an identity parade and Luke Knight were charged with the murder on the 13th of May and the 23rd of June, respectively. But the charges were dropped on the 29th of July in 1993. The Crown Prosecution Service cited insufficient evidence. An internal review was opened in August 1993 by the Metropolitan Police. On the 16th of April in 1994, the Crown Prosecution Service stated they did not have sufficient evidence for murder charges against anyone else, despite a belief by the Lawrence family that new evidence had been found. In September 1994, so pretty much a year later, Stephen's family initiated a private prosecution against the initial 2 suspects and 3 others, Jamie Aycourt, Gary Dobson and David Norris. The family were not entitled to legal aid, and a fighting fund was established to pay for the analysis of forensic evidence and the cost of tracing and re-interviewing witnesses. The family were represented by counsel Michael Mansfield, QC, Martin, I can't pronounce that, Sorjo, and Margot Boy, who all worked pro bono. The charges against Jamie Aycourt and David Norris were dropped before the trial for lack of evidence. On the 23rd of April 1996, the 3 remaining suspects were acquitted of murder by a jury at the Central Criminal Court after the trial judge, the Honourable Mr. Justice Curtis, ruled that the identification evidence given by Dwayne was unreliable. The Macpherson report endorsed the judgment, stating that, quote, Mr. Justice Curtis could have properly reached only one conclusion. There was simply no satisfactory evidence available. After the February 1997 inquest returned a verdict of unlawful killing, the front page of the Daily Mail labelled all 5 suspects as murderers and instructed them to sue if the assumption was wrong. Wow, that's brave. None of the men ever sued for defamation, and strong public opinions rose against the accused and the police who handled the case. Stephen's parents and numerous political figures praised the Daily Mail for taking the potential financial risk of this front page. An inquest into the death of Stephen was held in February 1997. The 5 suspects refused to answer any questions, claiming privilege against self-incrimination. The inquest concluded on the 13th of February 1997, with the jury returning a verdict after 30 minutes deliberation of unlawful killing, quote, in a completely unprovoked racist attack by 5 white youths. This finding went beyond the bounds of their instructions. In July 1997, an inquiry was ordered by the Home Secretary to identify matters related to the murder, known as the Macpherson Report, which was completed in February 1999. In 2002, David Norris and Neil Acorp were convicted and jailed for racially aggravated harassment after an incident involving a plain-clothes black officer. In 2005, the law was changed as part of the findings on the Stephen Lawrence case. The Macpherson Report had recommended that the rule against double jeopardy is a common law rule that once acquitted, an accused person could not be tried for a second time for the same crime. So they want it to be squished in murder cases, and that it should be possible to subject an acquitted murder suspect to a second trial if, quote, fresh and viable new evidence later came to light. The Law Commission later added its support to this in its report, Double Jeopardy and Prosecution Appeals, in 2001. A parallel report into the criminal justice system by Lord Justice Auld, AULD, a former senior presiding judge for England and Wales, had also commenced in 1999, and it was published as the Auld, AULD, report 6 months after the Law Commission report. It stated that the Law Commission had been unduly cautious by limiting the scope to murder, and that, quote, the exception should extend to other grave offences punishable with life and or long terms of imprisonment as Parliament might specify. These recommendations were implemented within the Criminal Justice Act in 2003, and this provision came into force in April 2005. It opened murder and certain other serious crimes, including manslaughter, kidnapping, rape, armed robbery, and some drug crimes, to a second prosecution, regardless of when committed, with 2 conditions. 1. The retrial must be approved by the Director of Public Prosecutions. And 2. The Court of Appeal must agree to quash the original acquittal because of new and compelling evidence. On the 27th of July in 2006, the Daily Mail repeated its now famous murderers front page. In July 2010, The Independent described the Stephen Lawrence murder, despite it having happened more than 17 years previously, as, quote, one of the highest profile unsolved racially motivated murders. In June 2006, 13 years later, a cold case review commenced involving a full re-examination of the forensic evidence. Initially, this was held in secrecy and not publicised. However, in November 2007, police confirmed they were investigating new scientific evidence. The most important of the new evidence comprised of a microscopic stain of Stephen's blood in Dobson's jacket. It had dried into the fibres, and its tiny size implied that this had happened very quickly. The forensic analysis concluded it had not been transferred there from somewhere else as dried blood or later soaked into the fabric, but it was deposited fresh and would have dried almost immediately after being deposited due to its microscopic size. Fibres from Stephen's clothing and hairs with a 99.9% chance of coming from Stephen found on the two men's clothes from the time or in the evidence bag holding them. The defence later argued unsuccessfully at trial that these were present due to contamination or lack of care of evidence. The police unit manager involved in the matter commented that the new evidence was only found because of scientific developments and developments in forensic approaches that had taken place since 1996, which allowed microscopic bloodstains and hair fragments to be analysed for DNA. Other microscopic evidence to be found and used forensically. So, Gary Dobson and David Norris were arrested and charged without publicity on the 8th of September 2010 and on the 23rd of October 2010. The Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, QC, applied to the Court of Appeal for Dobson's original acquittal to be quashed. Dobson was in prison at the time for drug dealing. Norris had not been previously acquitted, so no application was necessary in his case. For legal reasons, to protect the investigation and ensure a fair hearing, reporting restrictions were put in place at the commencement of these proceedings, and arrests and subsequent developments were not publicly reported at the time. Dobson's acquittal was quashed following a 2-day hearing on the 11th and 12th of April 2011, enabling his retrial. On the 18th of May 2011, the Court of Appeal handed down its judgment and the reporting restrictions were partially lifted. It was announced by the Crown Prosecution Service that the two would face trial for Stephen's murder in light of, quote, new and substantial evidence. The judgment of the court stated, quote, if reliable, the new scientific evidence would place Dobson in very close proximity indeed to Stephen Lawrence at the moment of and in the immediate aftermath of the attack. Moreover, for which no innocent explanation can be discerned. The ruling also emphasised that this was to be, quote, a new trial of a defendant who, we repeat, is presumed in law to be innocent, and suggested a cautious and fact-based reporting style to avoid contempt of court or risk the prejudice of the future trial. A jury was selected on the 14th of November 2011 and the trial, presided over by Mr. Justice Treacy, began the next day at the Central Criminal Court, with the prosecution led by Mark Ellison, QC. The case centred on the new forensic evidence and whether it demonstrated the defendant's involvement in the murder, or was the result of later contamination due to police handling. On the 3rd of January 2012, after the jury had deliberated for 8 hours, Dobson and Norris guilty of Stephen's murder. The two were sentenced on the 4th of January 2012 to detention at Her Majesty's pleasure, equivalent to a life sentence for an adult, with a minimum term of 15 years and 2 months for Dobson and 14 years and 3 months for Norris. Time spent on remand by Dobson was not deducted from his minimum term to ensure his existing sentence for drug-related offences was served. The judge's sentencing remarks were later published in full online. The judge stated that the sentences reflected the fact that Dobson and Norris were juveniles. Dobson was 17 and Norris was 16 at the time of the offence, which took place before the Criminal Justice Act in 2003. The starting point for the minimum term was therefore 12 years. The judge acknowledged this was, quote, lower than some might expect. A similar crime committed in 2011 as an adult would have justified a minimum sentence of 30 years. Following the 2012 convictions, the Daily Mail editor since 1992 issued a comment on his 1997 headline decision. This is what he said, so it's a quote, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that if it hadn't been for the Mail's headline in 1997, murderers, the Mail accuses these men of killing, and our years of campaigning, none of this would have happened. Britain's police might not have undergone the huge internal reform that was so necessary. Race relations might not have taken the significant step forward that they have, and an 18-year-old A-level student who dreamed of being an architect would have been denied justice. The Daily Mail took a monumental risk with that headline. In many ways, it was an outrageous and unprecedented step. Others have argued that, in writing the above, Paul was overselling his involvement in what had finally been achieved. On the 30th of January 2012, it emerged that Norris and Dobson were seeking leave from the Court of Appeal to appeal against their convictions. On the 23rd of August 2012, it was reported that Norris and Dobson had lost their first round of their appeal. On the 15th of March 2013, it was announced that Gary Dobson had dropped his appeal against his murder conviction. On the 31st of July 1997, the Home Secretary Jack Straw ordered a public inquiry to be conducted by Sir William Macpherson, which we have touched on previously, and officially titled The Inquiry into the Matters Arising from the Death of Stephen Lawrence, and published as the Macpherson Report. Its report, produced in February 1999, estimated that it had taken, quote, more than 100,000 pages of reports, statements and other written or printed documents, and concluded that the original Metropolitan Police Service investigation had been incompetent and that officers had committed fundamental errors, including failing to give first aid when they reached the scene, failing to follow obvious leads during their investigation, and failing to arrest suspects. The report found that there had been a failure of leadership by senior Metropolitan Police officers, and that recommendations of the 1981 Scarman report, compiled following race-related riots in Brixton, had been ignored. Detective Superintendent Brian Whedon said during the inquiry that mistakes had been made in the murder investigation, including his own ignorance that he could have arrested the suspects 4 days after the murder, simply on reasonable suspicion. The report also found that the Metropolitan Police was institutionally racist. A total of 70 recommendations for reform covering both policing and criminal law were made. These proposals included abolishing the double jeopardy rule and criminalising racist statements made in private. Macpherson also called for reform in the British civil service, local governments, the National Health Service, schools and the judicial system to address issues of institutional racism. In 1997, Stephen Lawrence's family registered a formal complaint with the Police Complaints Authority, which in 1999 exonerated the officers who had worked on the case of alleged racism. Only one officer, Detective Inspector Ben Bullock, was ordered to face disciplinary charges for neglect of duty. Bullock, who was second in command of the investigation, was later found guilty of failure to properly brief officers and failure to fully investigate an anonymous letter sent to police, but he was acquitted of 11 other charges. 4 other officers who would have been charged as a result of the inquiry retired before it concluded. Bullock retired the day after his punishment was announced, so that it amounted to a mere caution. Neville, Stephen's father, criticised the punishment, saying that Bullock was, quote, guilty on all counts. However, a spokesperson for the Metropolitan Police Federation stated that Bullock had been, quote, largely vindicated in the proceedings. On the 10th of March 2006, the Metropolitan Police Service announced that it would pay Dwayne Brooks, the friend that was with him, £100,000 as compensation for the manner in which police had handled his complaints about their actions towards him after the murder. On the 25th of July 2006, the Independent Police Complaints Commission announced that it had asked the Metropolitan Police to look into alleged claims of police corruption that may have helped hide the killers of Stephen Lawrence. A BBC investigation alleged that the murder inquiry Detective Sergeant John Davidson had taken money from known drug smuggler Clifford Norris, the father of David Norris, a chief suspect in the investigation. Neil Putnam, a former corrupt police detective turned whistleblower, told a BBC investigation that Clifford Norris was paying Davidson to obstruct the case and to protect the suspects. Quote, Davidson told me that he was looking after Norris, and that to me meant that he was protecting him, protecting his family against arrest and any conviction. Davidson denied any such corruption. There's no smoke without fire, is there? The need to re-establish trust between minority ethnic communities and the police is paramount. Seeking to achieve trust and confidence through a demonstration of fairness will not in itself be sufficient. It must be accompanied by a vigorous pursuit of openness and accountability. On the 17th of December 2009, Independent Police Complaints Commission investigators and officers from the Metropolitan Police of Professional Standards arrested a former police constable and a serving member of Metropolitan Police staff on suspicion of attempting to pervert the course of justice by allegedly withholding evidence from the original murder inquiry, the Kent investigation and the Macpherson inquiry. Dr. Richard Stone, who sat on the Macpherson inquiry, commented that the panel had felt that there was, quote, a large amount of information that the police were either not processing or were suppressing. A strong smell of corruption. Baroness Ros Howells, patron of the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust, agreed, quote, lots of people said they gave the police evidence which was never produced. On the 1st of March 2010, the IPCC announced that, quote, no further action will be taken against the 2 men arrested following concerns identified by the Internal Metropolitan Police Service review of the murder of Stephen Lawrence, and the 2 men were released from bail. On the 23rd of June 2013, an interview with Peter Francis, a former Special Demonstrations Squad undercover police officer, was published in The Guardian. In the interview, Francis stated that while he was working undercover within an anti-racist campaign group in the mid-1990s, he was constantly pressured by superiors to smear the credibilities of the family of Stephen Lawrence, so as to put an end to campaigns for a better investigation into Stephen's death. After the allegation, Home Secretary Theresa May pledged to be, quote, ruthless about purging corruption from the police. And Prime Minister David Cameron ordered police to investigate the allegations, saying of them that he was, quote, deeply worried about the reports. Chief Constable Mick Creedon, who is leading Operation Hearn, an ongoing inquiry into Metropolitan Police undercover operations against protest groups, said he would investigate the allegations as part of the inquiry. In October 2015, an inquiry was set up by the National Crime Agency to investigate allegations that members of the police force shielded the alleged killers. Following the 2002 convictions, further inquiries by both Scotland Yard and the Independent Police Complaints Commission ruled that there was no new evidence to warrant further investigation. After discussions with Doreen Lawrence, Home Secretary Theresa May commissioned Mark Ellison, QC, to review Scotland Yard's investigations into alleged police corruption. The report, titled The Stephen Lawrence Independent Review, was presented to Parliament on the 6th of March 2014. Sir Bernard Hogan Howe, Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, said the report, which prompted an inquiry into undercover policing, was, quote, devastating. Ellison's report also showed that there was substantial evidence linking an alleged corrupt police officer with the involvement in the murder of private investigator Daniel Morgan. Going back to Stephen Lawrence, an annual architect award, the Stephen Lawrence Prize, was established in 1998 by the Marco Goldschmied Foundation in association with the Royal Institute of British Architects in Stephen's memory. His mother Doreen said, quote, I would like Stephen to be remembered as a young man who had a future. He was well loved, and had he been given a chance to survive, maybe he would have been the one to bridge the gap between black and white, because he didn't distinguish between black or white. He saw people as people. In 1995, a memorial plaque was set into the pavement at the spot where he was killed on Well Hall Road. The plaque has been vandalised several times since then. How disgusting. I mean, really, why? In 1999, Nicholas Kent designed a documentary play based on the trial called The Colour of Justice. It was staged at the Tricycle Theatre and was later filmed by the BBC. It was also performed at the Guildford School of Acting for the 20th anniversary of the murder. On the 7th of February 2008, the Stephen Lawrence Centre, designed by architect David Adjaye, opened in Deptford, South East London. A week later, it was vandalised in an attack and was initially believed to be racially motivated. However, doubt was cast on that assumption when CCTV evidence appeared to show one of the suspects to be mixed race. The Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust is a national educational charity committed to the advancement of social justice. The Trust provides educational and employability workshops and mentoring schemes. It also awards architectural and landscape bursaries. In October 2012, Doreen Lawrence received a Lifetime Achievement Award at the 14th Pride of Britain Awards. She sits on the Labour benches in the House of Lords as a working peer specialising in race and diversity. On the 23rd of April 2018, at a memorial service to mark the 25th anniversary of his death, Prime Minister Theresa May announced that Stephen Lawrence Day would be an annual national commemoration of his death on the 22nd of April every year, starting in 2019. Doreen made a statement that Stephen Lawrence Day would be, quote, an opportunity for young people to use their voices and should be embedded in our education and wider system, regardless of the government of the day. Wow. I didn't want to talk about my opinions along the way because there is a whole lot to digest, and I hope you appreciate it. I know some of you will be diamond painting, but I did put up, because we spoke about so many names, I put the suspects up and circled them all for you. It's taken me quite a long time to edit this video, but I wanted to pay homage to Stephen Lawrence first and foremost. A pure and utter tragedy, and I get upset talking about this. The most upsetting aspect of this whole thing is that if he only stuck to the same bus route and got home late and got told off by his parents, he would still be here and quite possibly an architect. He changed to go to Well Hall Road because he didn't want to get home late. And the tragic thing is he never came home at all. I'm glad after 19 years, finally justice was served, and although all 5 didn't go to jail, 2 did out of those 5. And hats off to Neville and Doreen, who pursued and hounded and railroaded and successfully got convictions for their son. And that's first and foremost, I wanted to pay homage to that fact. Secondly, what upsets me the most about this case is his life was taken by thugs and racists, and all the way up the chain was institutional racism, which is wrong on every single level. Truly heartbreaking. No matter who you are, no matter what colour your skin is, no matter what your profession, no matter what sexuality you identify with, we all deserve the same respect and justice. And another sad factor of this whole case is we're not talking 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. We're talking 1993. 1993, 28 years ago. And the institutional racism. And I was 14 at the time that this was all over the news. And there's a documentary on telly, I believe, called Stephen. And I want to watch that. I haven't watched it yet. And it kind of brought this case back to the forefront. And I remember it growing up. And I thought, I'm going to look into this. Because I remember a teenager being stabbed at the bus stop. But it was tragic, and I was very young when it was all over the news, and I wanted to do this bit after because I wanted to get all the facts out there. And I know there's a lot of legal jargon in there, which again, due to Stephen Lawrence and his parents and the Daily Mail for doing that article, which could have gone very wrong financially for them if they had have claimed slander, basically. But they couldn't because they knew they'd done it. Due to Stephen Lawrence and his family, and not forgetting Stuart and Georgina, of course, brother and sister, but Stephen changed a lot of laws, a whole lot of laws. And the jaw-dropping thing is that report was over 100,000 pages of wrongdoing, not what went right in that investigation, all racism, the corruption, everything. But he changed a whole lot of laws, which is benefiting a ton of people now. You can go 10, 20 years and be called back into court and proved guilty. As tragic as losing Stephen is, he has brought in a massive reform in the law, which is an outstanding achievement, in my opinion. I was about to sign off when I went on to look for a picture of Stephen. In my dialogue of the case, Doreen said that she wants us to remember Stephen as a happy teenager, along those words. So I didn't use the standard news-generated image of Stephen. I found a happy one, and that's what I used in the video. I came across an article that I had to share with you, so it's an update of sorts. Gary Dobson on the left, not a peep out of him. He's quietly, I think it said Gertrude Jail. I don't even know where that is, but that's where he is. Oh, Leicestershire, I think, or Leicestershire, I think. Don't quote me. But David Norris, how menacing does he look? Yeah, wait for it. Okay, so where is Norris now? Norris is now in a high security Her Majesty's Prison, Garth in Lancashire, and has received more than £220,000 in legal aid while repeatedly challenging his conviction. Now, outrageous in itself, but what else has he got to do? I mean, he's been sentenced there till Her Majesty's pleasure, meaning that when someone remembers they're in there and looks into it, they'll be released. But they got sentenced to a minimum, I think it was 14 years for Norris, wasn't it? 12 or 14. Just do your time. you know. Anyway, in 2018, Norris was given a... Oh my God. Sorry for my language. In 2018, Norris was given a £10,000 payout after he sued the Ministry of Justice over an attack on him in jail and claimed not enough was done to protect him. Like, what are you in jail for? Attacking a defenceless teenager. I mean, okay, he was a teenager himself at that point. But attacking someone to death, and he got £10,000. Norris was found covered in blood in his cell at Belmarsh Jail, South East London, while awaiting trial in 2011. Everyone knew he was involved. He needed hospital treatment for a broken nose and ribs. He claimed he was attacked with a knife and a sock full of tins, and alleged officials left him vulnerable by moving him to a wing with a large number of violent inmates. He'll fit in well then, won't he? No prisoner was ever charged, and the Ministry of Justice had argued Norris had to prove it took place and the identity of the assailants. Court officials confirmed a settlement was reached, but the Ministry of Justice refused to comment on how much public money it has paid the killer. At the time, Victims' Rights Campaign Director Harry Fletcher said, quote, "It is totally unjust that serving prisoners are getting legal aid and receive compensation when the vast majority of victims of crime receive no such support and have to fund themselves. This is yet another insult to the Lawrence family." And I couldn't agree more. Oh, it's angered me all over again. I calmed down. I have been spending days going through this story, editing it, and now I'm angry again. It's outrageous. Thank you so much for joining me and keeping me company. Please do leave me a comment down below. I am angry. And I don't know Stephen Lawrence or his family or anything, but I am truly... When I looked into this case, I wasn't prepared for the amount of detail that was going to come out. I had no idea that we were dealing with corrupt officers or racist officers or anything, because obviously being a 14-year-old child when this happened, and I don't know what I took from that, but I'm angry, really angry. As you can tell, I'm not normally this invested in my true crime cases, and yeah, my heart just goes out to the Lawrence family. Really and truly. Thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate it, and please leave me a comment down below and let me know your thoughts on this whole entire case. And I shall see you next week, guys. Thank you for joining me. It's been a long one. It's been a complicated one, and I hope that you have made it to the end, especially for the update as well. Stay safe, guys. Bye.